let's get the read on all of this with the former CBO director, Douglas Holtz-Eakin. I guess a deal is a deal, Doug, but almost everything seems to telegraph there won't be much spending being cut on either side for military-related items, non-military-related items, and we'll be staring at trillion-dollar deficits for at least another couple of years. What do you think?
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Certainly, there was a time when they got rid of the budget caps and then used mandatory spending reductions as offsets. They weren't very real, but there was at least the fig leaf of caring about the deficit. Sounds like there's no attempt to do that in this deal. I think that's a real problem substantively. I will point out, Neil, that a couple years ago, 2018, there was exactly such a deal on the table. It came over to the White House, and the president really showed his displeasure with it and threatened not to sign it. So I want to be convinced that everyone has signed off on this before we start congratulating ourselves. It does have to get done. I mean, they've tied together this budget deal, which is a matter of the politics, and the raising the debt limit, which is something that's economically quite dangerous if they fail to do it. So they do have to get it done, and I hope that everyone's really signed off on the deal.
You know, you're wise to point out, as you always are, that President Trump at the last moment last year was just flummoxed about it, furious about it, ultimately agreed to it because I believe at the time it provided more of the military funding he was seeking, but he wasn't happy. Now, this is actually a pricier deal than that one, and I'm wondering whether he would go along, or you're hearing from anyone that he might not.
Until I've heard that the president says this is the deal, it's not a deal. There has to be something that can get through the House, and there's a significant number of Republicans who are very unhappy at the lack of offsets. Has to get through the Senate, has to be signed by the president. Until then, it's not a deal. It's happy talk, and this is an important issue. You know, this is a lot of spending. It's easy to sort of, you know, point out that 70% of the spending is off the table. That's the mandatories. You and I have talked about that a lot. But this is about a 10% increase in discretionary spending each year. That's a big bump. And so I'd make sure everyone was happy with that without offsets.
You know, I've heard a lot of people dismiss it. I think even it was in Barron's, I don't know whether it was this past weekend or the weekend before, talking about the fact that on a percent of GDP, it's not nearly so bad. With interest rates as low as they are and likely to stay that way, it's not nearly so onerous. So everyone calm down. What do you make of that?
I think that kind of talk is actually quite dangerous. We hear people say things like, well, you don't have to work on deficit reduction. As long as you pay for what you're going to propose in terms of new things, we'll be fine. They're not doing that. This is a proposal for $320 billion rumored new spending that they're not paying for. And so we have a debt to GDP that's unstable. It's going north. There's no sign of it stabilizing. And all that happy talk assumes that it gets stabilized at some level. It's not being.
Now, there had been talk, and maybe this is advanced by the White House, that if the president were to get reelected, he would have a plan to start really addressing this. Do you believe that?
Well, one of the interesting things about this is that there doesn't appear to be the fiction of putting future caps in place that will control discretionary spending. And that's fine if it means that they're going to get serious about the other 70%, the mandatories, the Social Security's, Medicare's, Medicaid's, Affordable Care Acts of the world. But the president has never previously shown any appetite for that. He took it off the table early in his first run. I have shown no signs of putting it on the table for his second run. So if there's no plan on discretionaries, there's no plan at all.
Yeah, and if you are against, as he was, campaigning for president, any reining in of entitlements like Social Security, and that's his, you know, opinion, I don't know what would make him do a 180 and change that, but maybe an emergency would. Douglas, we'll see what happens. Good seeing you again.